do this?
Let's do it.
Cool. How can you tell how heavy a red hot chili pepper is? You give it away, give it away, give it away.
Oh, God. Yeah, you would definitely be able to figure out the weight.
All right.
That was your delivery on that was better than normal.
I was stalling a little bit while the birds were going off, so I could figure out the delivery. Anyway, topic-wise today, I wanted to share a story and talk about bottom lines / lines of defense. There's a friend of ours who I was really just had a cool experience with recently, and wanted to give a shout out to him for how he handled himself in this situation. So he's somebody who has struggled with alcohol in the past, and he's been doing some real work recently in the last year or so to try and get some good healthy behavior around alcohol. So he's abstaining, and he has a bottom line, and we can talk about what that is exactly a little bit later, but a bottom line that he will not even touch containers of alcohol. And so he found one that was an old bottle that he had used a long time ago, just had it hidden somewhere, found it, and knew that my wife and I would be coming over with our kids to have dinner with them. And he waited until we got there and said, "Hey, I've got a favor to ask." And he was kind of uncomfortable.
Yeah, like it's a weird thing to ask.
What is this? Yeah. So I didn't know what was coming. And then he said, "Hey, I've got the bottom line. Would you mind helping me by grabbing this container for me and just discarding it?" And I didn't even throw it away in the trash can in his house. I took it with me, and that was a better situation for him. So in my mind, what a hero, what a guy for doing that. In his mind, probably, man, I'm feeling kind of sheepish.
That's weird, and I'm feeling a little weak. And
yeah, but maybe let's talk about that. So first off, what is a bottom line, and how do you go about establishing one? What's the value of them?
Great question. Shout out to I know the person you're talking about too, and shout out to him for actually sticking to his bottom line first. So we call them lines of defense, bottom lines. In essence, you find something in your life an outcome that's taking place in your life that you don't like, a problem behavior, something that's going on that you don't like. And then what you do is you systematically track the patterns all the way back to the very beginning of the pattern. And then you go back and look through and find places that you have control over where you could change the habit loop that leads you to the end. So in essence, we use this idea of kind of going off the edge of a cliff, and you walk yourself off close to the edge of it, and then it begins to give you a little bit slippery slope, and then it drops straight off. Let's say with alcohol, we're using this as with alcohol, his goal is to stop drinking alcohol. If he sets a bottom line or a line of defense that I don't drink alcohol, he's going to be living a life that's still full of all of the habits that have been established that get him to drink alcohol. So he's going to spend a lot of time being miserable down right on the edge of the cliff, using only his willpower until his willpower fades, and then he relapses. And he's like, I crossed my bottom line. I drank again. But if he sets a new line that's like, you know what, if I never even touch a container of alcohol, the only way I relapse is if somebody pours it in for me, right? Which is actually a pretty good bottom line, right? Because now he's going to have to talk about feeling like sheepish and weak. Like, I have a bottom line, but
hit me, mama bird.
Yeah, unless he's at a frat party or something, and he uses the gravity bong as that I'm not touching anything. Which at that point then defeats
mental gymnastics.
Yeah, it just defeats the purpose of the bottom line in the first place. So what you're doing with the bottom line is you're finding your patterns and saying, okay, let's use a different example, pornography. I can set my line, I don't look at porn, but that's already, if I hit that, I've already crossed it, and I've already used way more of my willpower than I want to use. Whereas if I say, you know what, I always do it when I'm alone, and I always do it through these particular kinds of sites. You know what, my new bottom line is that I'm not going to get on the internet alone, period, right? And so that's what a bottom line is it's a bottom line. It's something that I don't do, or I do no matter what now. So in his situation, his bottom line is, I don't want to touch alcohol because then I'll end up drinking it. In this situation, he could have just gone and said, I'm actually touching this so I can throw it away.
Right, yeah.
Right, like he wasn't even going to drink it.
Yeah.
But he knew that you have to take your bottom lines seriously as if your life depends on it. Because his life, the way he wants to live his life, actually depends on that. Right? And if you start what happens with the brain is if you let your mind slide a little bit on this bottom line here, and then the back of your brain goes, oh, see, no big deal. And then you let it slide a little bit more, and then you let up on a few other things, and pretty soon you're doing this slow fade until all of a sudden you're on the edge of the cliff again, and you're like, guys, I had this guy one time, he had a bottom line with porn. His routine was that he would get bored, he'd get a bunch of snacks, he'd start eating these snacks, and then he'd play video games. And then he'd play video games until he was bored of video games, and then he'd act out with porn, right? So he comes in, he's like, my new bottom line, guys, is that I gave up my Xbox, like no more video games. I had someone package it up, put it in the closet, like I'm not touching my video games anymore. Comes in like 3 months later and he's like, guys, sobriety's been easy. Like it's been so easy. Like I haven't acted out in 3 months. And when he's like acting out almost every day, you know, and he's like, so you know what? I'm good now. I'm bringing back my video games. And everyone's like in group, like, are you sure you want to do that? Like, you're winning. You're winning right now. You've got 3 months of sobriety under your belt. Like, you're doing great. He's like, no. I'm good now. I figured it out. He comes in the very next week to group. Guys, I relapsed. I don't know what happened. I don't know how I don't know how it happened. We'll map it out, you know? So we map it out. He's like, well, I sat down, I was bored, I started eating snacks, then I just started playing my Xbox, and somehow I was looking at porn again. Like, it's like, that's what you said 3 months ago. Like, that's why you have the bottom line the way you had it, is because you figured out the link. You actually were winning with the pivotal link. And then he just didn't want to have the inconvenience of not having his video games. But he didn't have the inner development of habit yet to actually keep the video games without looking at the porn, because the habit was so strong. Yeah. So I don't know, to answer your question.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's a really good demonstration. I was going to share one. I didn't, classify it as the bottom line at the time, but back in college when I was trying to quit alcohol, I'd been binge drinking up until the age of 21 when I could finally legally drink. I decided hey, I need to be done with this. I'm trying to change my life. And in order for me to do that, I need to stop drinking beer like the way that I used to drink beer, or liquor the way that I used to drink liquor. But champagne, I only drink it on New Year's.
It's only on special occasions, so I'll do champagne only.
So that was my bottom line, is I only drink champagne. But then I just got to the point where I was just drinking champagne all the time. It was costing me way more money.
So the good thing is you were moving yourself, going, okay, I got a problem, and the problem is the binge drinking. And since champagne is a special occasion thing, the problem is that then your addict part of your brain, that part was like, well, I'm not breaking a bottom line. Somehow it's important to us to feel like we're still keeping our integrity, right?
Like I'm not cheating myself somehow.
Yeah, that's a perfect example, because I think for most people, when we start looking at lines of defense, they go one of two different ways. One is that they go way rigid, because I have acted out sexually, I am going to put a rubber band on my penis and never allow myself to feel sexual feelings again. And then of course they fail.
Clamp the hose, yeah.
Right, they totally clamp it down. And then of course it doesn't work, right? So that's one way, is I'm gonna go too rigid. I'm not really gonna go along with what's actually going on with my patterns, with what I need. And then the other side is, how close can I get to the edge of the cliff Like how can I keep as much of my pattern as possible, but maybe still win?
It's like greasing up with Crisco.
Yeah, exactly. And it's like somewhere more in the middle, and I would say even more towards the safe side is usually best for most people. So if I have one where it's like I have problems with endless scrolling, that leads to me getting numb, and then I click on some of the clickbait over there, and then I feel guilty, so then I kind of dabble in some softcore stuff, and then because I feel even guilty, and now I've already messed up, then I go into my other stuff. I'm probably not going to set the line at, hey, softcore. I probably need to set the line more at, hey, you know what? I'm not going to be on endless scrolling sites, because the habit loop is really strong, and the further down the habit loop we get, the less willpower we have. So
that makes sense.
So bottom line, or a line of defense needs to be specific enough not to loophole, but general enough to cover what you need it to cover,
And it's something you might have to do more than once to adjust.
And it's so funny, like, why do we do it to ourselves, that we like loophole ourselves, like we bargain with ourselves, like we're somehow like being moral in all of this? We're the ones that are setting the lines in the first place. Like, it's like people are like, well, I'm being controlled by, like, I've got one guy right now, he knows who he is, he'll like this. He's got a bottom line right now that he doesn't leave the valley without somebody else with him, the valley where we live, because he would leave the valley and then that's where he'd get into trouble with, massage parlors, other stuff. So he comes in a group one day and he's all bitter. He's like, I got this opportunity to go do this, but it's outside the valley, and like, I can't even go. It's like, when my wife says I'll be breaking a bottom line if I go, I'm like, well, is it your bottom line? He's like, yeah, but like, well, it's your bottom line. Like, you could do whatever you want with that. You want to change your bottom line? Talk it through with someone on your team and figure out if it's actually going to work for you. Like, he's like, I'm like all handcuffed. Like, I can't do this thing. Well, you set the line. At least he's holding his line. But that's the thing, is that the bottom lines only work with the ability of us to be honest with ourselves and act with our own integrity.
Right.
Otherwise they don't work.
Okay. So I'm curious, what are some bottom lines that you've seen that are really effective? Like, who are some examples that you have in mind of guys that just nailed it? And maybe they didn't nail it the first time, but they eventually got there and figured it out.
It's a good question. Maybe I'll give a couple examples of specific lines, but maybe even more importantly, it's more of the principle that goes into bottom lines. So if you look at like what bottom lines are, the logistical thing is that you set this new target behavior. I don't touch an alcohol bottle anymore. I don't touch any container that has alcohol in it. Okay, that's a great bottom line. For his specific situation, if he actually follows that one thing, he only has to do one thing the rest of his life, and he won't drink. That's a pretty good bottom line, right? The challenge to a bottom line is that it also reinforces a few principles, because a bottom line always has the target you're going to change with accountability built into it. So if I bump into my bottom line or I cross my bottom line, I'm going to reach out to somebody on my team and I'm going to reset it. So now I have to be honest with myself. I have to be humble enough to make the right choice with what I know my actual situation is. And then I get the chance to be accountable, and then I get a chance to connect with people, because when I run into my bottom lines, I'm connecting. So I'm actually reinforcing 4 principles of recovery at the same time that I'm creating sobriety or changing my habit loops, right? So good examples, and this is going to be per situation, right? But I have some pretty common ones are things around like pornography use. A lot of guys have their own little kind of ritual to get into the pornography. They'll kind of bounce along with dabbling in something else that's numbing, sports or something else, and then they inevitably get picked off by the clickbait of some athlete's hot wife or something.
When you say ritual, you don't mean they like scheme up like this is how I'm gonna do it, as much as this is kind of the
pattern.
The pattern.
Rituals are the patterns that set up the acting out. A lot of the rituals we do are actually by themselves, they're not harmful or damaging to us, right? So no problem for anybody to go check the sports scores. But when I've done it enough times where I check the sports scores and the back of my mind is like, that's first base. And then I start scrolling for all of the leftover news that's on that thing, and then I find the one thing that's got like a girl that's dressed a little bit funny, and I know that I'm going to click on it because I'm actually just really interested in her as a golfer or something.
Right, yeah.
But you know better.
You're already cheating yourself, yeah.
And then that starts to move you further down. That's what I talk about, like rituals. So identify your own rituals and set the line with rituals that are way far up the chain rather than right down at the bottom. So my own bottom lines when I had to get sober from pornography, there were a few. One, I did not use the internet alone, period. And I knew I would cheat on my phone, so I took all internet off my phone. Gaming for me was a gateway into my pornography, so I stopped playing all video games unless it was in the presence of or with other people. Mm-hmm. And I took those off my phone too. And then I didn't use YouTube because for me, YouTube was the pivotal kind of link. I would go there, I got sucked into other things numbing me, and then always there was either an ad or something else that would then just kind of lead me down the rabbit hole. So I only had 3 bottom lines to get sober, but they worked. But they worked for my situation because those were my patterns. Right? So let me think of some other bottom lines. It could be over any other behavior too. Think about it like I've used this in the past and I've actually relapsed since this, but I went for almost 7 years without drinking any soda. I was drinking about 130 ounces a day of Dr. Pepper, Mountain Dew, until I went to the dentist, and the dentist was like, you drink way too much soda, and that's before he took the x-rays.
Good to meet you.
He's like, so do you want to do these fillings in like per quadrant of the mouth, or do you don't want to do it per top or bottom? But we have like 13 fillings we need to do. I'm like, oh my gosh, my life is out of control. Like, it's unmanageable, right? That's an addiction. So I'm like, I gotta get clean off of soda. Like, I gotta stop this. And
I remember some of the family photos of you during Christmas time, and you were a thick boy. And you were
a lot thicker than I am now.
Yeah.
I'm still trying to bring that down a little bit, but that was when I was at the pinnacle of my worst health ever. No wonder I had to get hip replacements.
Weren't you hitting Gossner's to get like cheese curd and Dr. Pepper on like the daily?
Oh yeah, no, I would purposely make loops that way. So my office is even on the way to Gossner's. I go by Gossner's, get my cheese curds, and then I'd stop at the Maverick at 10th West and just like load up on a 64 ouncer. And the sad thing is I would usually fill it up and drink half of it and then top it off. So I'm like, man, I gotta stop this. And I was trying to stop, I couldn't figure out how to stop, and what I realized was it sounds so stupid. This is how bad my denial was. I would go on purpose almost every day to gas up my car, and then I would gas up, but I would pay inside. So that I could justify the gas expense. So I'm like, all right. I noticed one day, right when I walked in the freaking gas station, my mouth just started to water, and I was like the glow light of like the fountain drinks. I was like, ooh. I'm like, that's it. If I never go into a gas station, I never buy a fountain drink. So I set that bottom line, and I cheated on it for like 2 weeks. I call my brother up and be like, hey, like, are you serious? Do you really want to keep this bottom line? Like, he's like, you know what? After 2 weeks, he's like, don't call me unless you're serious about it. I'm like, okay, I'll go. And that's when I started to get a foothold, and I didn't go into a gas station for several months. I paid at the pump only when I needed gas, and I got some sobriety. And then I ended up being sober up until this last year, and now this last year we have a client.
Oh man.
We have a client who worked for a place that did energy drinks. I never drank an energy drink in my life. He started bringing them to me on the weekly. And so I got hooked on energy drinks, and now that's gone back into a 64 ouncer occasionally. It's still not what it was, but I gotta tighten that back up again. So it's funny how those patterns are so strong too. Yeah.
Oh, that's so funny.
Yeah.
Oh, good, man. I'm glad to hear that. Okay, but one thing I want to bring up is there are times where you, like with the guy that went back to his Xbox, right?
Yeah.
3 months, he hadn't really changed fully.
No.
The habit loop wasn't totally broken. It was just kind of dormant. And then he woke it back up and just kicked it right back into gear. I know that you watch hunting videos on YouTube, right? And there's other things that you watch on YouTube. And that was one of your bottom lines previously. When did you decide, like, hey, it's probably okay for me to kind of dial that back and do something different?
This is a good question because it's got principle in it too. With that specific one, I'll give the principles. I didn't watch YouTube for like 3 years, and that was really hard because my friends would watch it. They'd like get together and like, hey, watch this, watch that. I didn't watch it at all. That was my bottom line. And then I started thinking, you know what, like, I started getting some confidence in myself, and I started to realize that things had changed, and I had a few years now of sobriety under my belt, and I thought, man, YouTube is actually a really good tool in some ways. So I actually changed my bottom line, but slowly. I actually went to, I'm only going to watch YouTube when it's a video that has been sent to me by somebody I trust. And so people would send me resources all the time that I'd never watched, so I went back and I watched trusted people's resources and only those videos. And then I added in, I'm going to watch YouTube with that after a while. And if I need to look up a question for how to fix something like at my house or, something like that, because it's so good at that. So then I added that in. And then I've brought it back to where I show things in my groups, almost every single group now. And now I use YouTube almost every day. I get my news there. I get my, I do all of my hobby stuff with my hunting and stuff there. But it took time, and it was systematically done with still limits and rules that would allow me to be successful with it rather than just go carte blanche with it again. And so that one took, 3 years before I felt safe enough to start even changing it at all. Some things will never change, I would say for most people, if you find a bottom line that works, don't even consider changing it until you've been doing it for at least a year.
And okay, so what about in your own life? Like what do you have any examples of bottom lines that you still have?
Yeah, this one's a little bit harder one, but like with relationships with women.
Yeah.
As soon as I started working my own recovery, I've had a bottom line that has not changed with relationships with other women, and that is that I don't interact with a woman ever in a way that if my wife was present, she would take exception to it.
Yeah.
And I know that feeling, like,
right, yeah.
And so that one has not changed. We've got another client who, he's been sober for 8-9 years, and one of his bottom lines is that he doesn't use his technology in his bedroom. And he could probably use technology in his bedroom and stay sober, but to this date, he's just found that he likes being able to have the bedroom be a place of thought and relaxation and connection with his wife. And so he's not going to bring it back,
That's great.
because he's found that it improves the quality of his life.
I think one of the coolest things about bottom lines is that while they do seem like a restraint and kind of a restriction, it also provides freedom.
It's for the sake of freedom, a new life, right? We're changing things that aren't producing what we want in our lives. So we're restricting the things that are tempting for us, but they're not effective for us. So we're creating space for the new to grow into.